Hello everyone, I'm Maja and I'm a keen advocate for youth empowerment through knowledge. I'm also a presenter at Youths of the World, and today I will be sharing with you how you can change yourself to become the very best version of you. Because don't we all dream of an ideal self? So how can you become the ideal version of you, you might be asking? Well, to begin with, we're first going to go through some background information. You see, we all have these very special cells called neurons, and they're the building blocks that determine how we act and react in a particular environment or situation, because they transmit the input from our senses to other parts of the body where they can be analysed and acted upon. A neuron is not hard or rigid cell, but rather flexible and changeable one. So let's take a look at what one actually looks like. Well, I've created a simplified diagram. So as you can see, it's very simplified. The start is the dendrites, and then you have the axon, and then it goes on to the axon terminals. So let's take a look at how they actually work. Well, we could first say the word neuron originates from the word, a Greek word that means cord connection. Because you could, as this photo sees, you can see they look like a cord that connects two parts, and they allow us to connect our entire body together. They're like the internet of our body. They work so fast through these things called action potentials. So let's say you have a stimulus, whether it's your brother playing really loud music, or you're at school and you hear the school bells, or a change in temperature, or even a change in thought. So first you have the stimulus, and then there's this really cool part. So you have your stimulus. Let's go back to the first one. You have your stimulus, and the stimulus will either release a type of hormone or chemical related on the stimulus, and the stimulus will come and act on it. So stimulus will come here, and then from here, so you have your dendrites, and then the stimulus will come and act, and then it will move through it to the axon terminals. So let's see how this actually occurs. Well, to begin with, we need to understand that these are what our dendrites and axons actually look like. They're like little keys. So the key is the neurotransmitter, and the dendrite that has receptors on it is like the lock. So how does this fully work? So we have our axon, and then we have an electrical impulse that moves through it. And then depending on the strength and the wave of the electrical impulse, it will stimulate different neurotransmitters to be released. And here we can see a different one. As the pulse comes down, it releases different neurotransmitters. And once the neurotransmitter reaches the receptors, it will thus stimulate a different reaction on the next neuron. And this is how we have an action potential occur. And an action potential to occur, we need to have a change in the chemical state of the neuron. So how does this occur from going to chemical to electrical? Well, for this to happen, we're going to have a change in state of the neuron. And for this to occur, we first have to understand that the resting state of the neuron is negative due to chloride ions. And ions is any atom that has an overall negative or positive charge. It's not neutral. So there's negative chloride atoms. And then on the outside of the cell, it has a resting positive state because there's more potassium ions. So when a neuron gets excited or it gets a stimuli from the dendrites, then the dendrites, depending on how many locks fit in, how many keys fit into locks, it will stimulate the neuron. And when the neuron becomes stimulated, this is where it gets really cool. This is where it moves into electrical. And this is where the cell membrane opens up, allowing for the positive potassium ions to move in. And as they move in, they create a wave that moves down the axon to the axon terminals. And then this is where, depending on the strength of the electrical wave, or now we know as an action potential, it will release different neurotransmitters. You heard me, it releases different neurotransmitters based on the wave. So depending on the stimuli, we could have hundreds of thousands of different reactions. And this is how a thought or action gets processed throughout an entire body. Isn't that pretty cool? But how does this relate to creating our ideal selves? Well, now that you know how your neurons work, and with the understanding that our neurons are not hard and rigid like scientists once thought, but rather flexible and changeable, you should now realize that you can change them by changing the stimuli they receive. Let's think of a grass meadow. The first time you walk across the grass, it gets bent over, but it's going to mostly spring back quite quickly. However, the more you walk down the route, the less likely the grass is going to spring back up, and the more clear that pathway will become. But if you want to go from one point to another, you will tend to follow the clear, well-established pathways rather than take another way that would take you more effort to walk down. In the same way, pathways of neurons that form into networks to transmit information from one area to our body to another become more defined and stronger the more they receive the same stimuli. The point is, the more you do something, the stronger the neural pathway gets, and the easier it is for us to do it. Scientists who study the brain refer to these kinds of well-established neural pathways as being hardwired because they are the easiest ones to go down. We naturally use them and they get stronger. And because they're stronger, we use them more. This recurring cycle, which will pretty soon start to show up as our habits and our personality, or even our addictions. You heard me, we can become addicted to certain emotions. Let's take, for example, someone who always gets angry. Like they get angry at the smallest thing, whether it's someone accidentally chucked a ball across the road as they're driving and they start blaring the horn rather than saying, oh, whoopsie daisies. So we can see that they've become addicted because this is the easiest path for them to follow, as they've done it the most often. And they're not going to go off in another one and be, oh, that's okay, that's fine. It happens to everyone. But no, they get angry, they get built up on this, and they blur it out because it's the easiest pathway for them to follow, as they're in the grass meadow. And when it's easy for us to do, we do it more often. And with this understanding, it can be life-changing because we can realize that we are hardwired behaviors that we don't want. And that's how we can learn to change them. To change, we first must know what we want to change from to what we want to change to. And yes, it may be hard because we're going off that easy pathway and moving to a harder one. But don't panic, it will soon become easier the more you do it. And just like cutting a new pathway through the meadow, you will once again create a new habit or a new way of life that is in line with what you want to be. What would you like to change? Maybe you're always pressing the snooze button on your phone, or maybe you'd like to break the habit of watching TV as soon as you come home, or getting distracted by your phone instead of studying for school the next day or work activities that you have to get ready. It's all about making the commitment to change. To do this, we work through our neocortex, which is the newest part of our brain. It sits right at the front. Without the neocortex, many of the qualities that we define ourselves as being, humans, wouldn't be so. It's what allows us to consciously act, thus allowing us to learn from our mistakes and have retakes. It's the CEO of our body. Just like any muscle, we need to train our brain to get the results we want from it. Have you ever looked at a tennis player's arm? The arm they play is far more developed and bigger than the other one. And this is because numerous hours. It's not just an abnormality, they've trained, and we can do the same with our brain. Let's do a little activity. I want you for the next 10 seconds to pay attention to the sounds in your environment. Ready, set, go. Did you hear the distant hum of your refrigerator, or the sound of a car moving past, or the sound of people talking, or your next door neighbours, or your parents upstairs? Because I'm sure you would have heard a sound that you didn't hear before, and that's because you paid your attention on it. And when you pay your attention on it, whether it's being happy, or focusing on good things, or focusing on angry things, you will create more of it. Because as you know, as you can see now, where you place your attention, you'll get more because your neocortex is on focus there. It's telling the rest of the brain what to focus on and what not to focus on. And it will put to sleep what is no longer needed because it's the CEO of our body. Through training and focus, we have the capacity to strengthen our cortex of our neocortex. Through training and focus, we have the capacity to strengthen our control of our neocortex, choosing what we put our attention on and how long or how we react within our environment. So let's take a look at this enormous gift in more detail. Firstly, we could say that this ability to intent defines our heroes. whether they're Olympic runners who wake up every morning at 5 or 4 a.m. to start training, or mathematicians who dedicate their time to solving the problems of the world. The one thing that these two examples have in common is intent and control. How can we too become the heroes to ourselves? Well, we need to have intent and control, which we now know lies in our neocortex. So if we use the neocortex to its full capacity, our actions will be in line with our intent, and our intent would be in line with our goal. But when we let our feelings get in the way, our neocortex goes back to sleep, and it undermines our intent. So we need to train ourselves to stop and change. Meaning when we notice ourselves doing something that we no longer want to be or do, we need to stop it and consciously change our behavior. It's like making the conscious decision to no longer walk down that grass pathway, making it stronger, but instead going off it and creating a new one. But in this case, the new pathway is in our neocortex, and it's in line with what we want to be and how we want to act. In comparison, have you ever seen any other animal, such as your dog, while it's scoffing down at its food, to stop and think about the ramifications of its actions? Our neocortex allows us to do this. But how often do we think about our actions and how to improve? Or are we just living off our past emotions and subconsciously living off the highs of these emotions that we have become hardwired to? As those regular hardwired neurocircuits are the easiest, they are our normal, since we naturally tend to embrace the comfortable and avoid the uncomfortable. And since change can require great effort and commitment, change can be difficult. I remember when I first began to run. Well, I wasn't really running. I started to walk, and the more I did it, the better I got at it. I could run to the rocks on the beach, and then I could run to the surf club until I could run all the way to the end of the beach. And then I stopped as things got in the way. And when I came back to running again, I could once again only walk, and then I could run a little bit further and further until I was running up to 6 kilometers a day. And this might not be a lot to you, but for me, it was heaps, because it was a point for me to say, no, I'm no longer going to give in to that addiction of sitting down and not being active. I overcame that and created a new pathway where I wanted to run and become a greater, better version of myself. There's something really cool about our brain that I haven't yet told you about. Researchers divided 2 groups of subjects. One group practiced playing the piano every day for an hour. The second group simply mentally rehearsed playing the piano, but didn't physically do anything. After 2 weeks, the participants were given brain scans, and that revealed that both groups had the same brain growth. The researchers concluded that we don't have to physically go through our change. We can mentally do it just as well. Our brains don't know the difference between mental rehearsal or physical rehearsal. It turns out the stimulus that excites our neuron doesn't have to be external, but through mental rehearsal, we can create our ideal selves. Whether it's wanting to be able to run farther, or get good marks at school, or reach your goal at work, or even in the way you see yourself in life, or the mood you portray on the world. Once you have your goal, you can then set steps to achieve it. Imagine what you could accomplish if every morning before you started your day, you took an hour to yourself to go through how you would act if you were living in your ideal world. By doing so, you're creating your ideal self and the world around you. And you might just find you're creating your ideal dream into a reality. Well, that's what I wanted to share with you today, so that you can too become the best version of yourself. And I know sometimes at school it might be difficult, or at work, and you draw back into your old self. But no, by setting up steps, fallback steps, so when you notice yourself getting into your old patterns, you say no, you'll stop changing, and you're focusing on new ones. You're creating who you want to be. And as a student myself, I'm in my final year of school, and this is what I thought was found really interesting. And from the elders and people that have inspired me, they've left this mark on the capacity that we have to change to create our ideal version of who we are. And that through knowledge, we too have the power to inspire others to be the best they can be, transforming the world we see around us and creating unity. Because when one is the best of themselves, they create a 10,000-fold, inspiring those around them,